And let's begin with you.
Okay,
And,
so to get back to kind of the debate we were having in this little support Cooper, but ultimately I agree about the reasons behind science education. But my background, I went to a private religious school in Virginia. I was taught, not creationism, but I was taught that climate change was not real, a bunch of different things that were basically against modern science. My senior physics class was all about how climate change was not real. It was extremely frustrating. But I am now today. My sister is a teacher, and although I feel that religion can be an impediment to scientific learning, I ultimately feel it's a socioeconomic issue. I've seen how she's had to struggle in different schools where she teaches, where she has kids that would like to learn that are coming from a different difficult background, and there's just a number of obstacles blocking them from being able to do so. Also, I think that religion in general is on the decline worldwide, and maybe not everywhere in the U.S., but in general, I think over my lifetime it's going to become less of an issue. And I think really the heart of the problem is the decline and widening of gap in income inequality.
Say that last part again, please.
I think the biggest problem right now is the widening gap in income inequality.
That's a shrewd observation. You know, I was looking at you. We're going to get back to you, and I got one more over here, but just a moment. And I was just thinking, it's theoretically possible that people sitting around here, some of you, will be alive at the dawn of the 22nd century. And what a prospect is that. I figure you'll be at, most of you, at least 105, but that's not going to be unusual. I think we are moving so fast in medicine now, and the elements of longevity, that we're going to have a lot of centenarians. So you better be thinking right now about what kind of a world you're going to be leaving everybody in the beginning of the 22nd century. Okay, who else? Oh, wait a minute. It was someone else who raised their hand just before.
I did a while ago.
What? Okay.
But
Let's hear from you.
Okay.
Again, that's right. You did raise your hand. I want to hear from you.
Okay.
Then we'll go to Eric.
So my comment was something that I think has been aptly covered. It was just a little bit in response to the suggestion that I don't want us to get into a dialogue or creating a discourse where we're saying essentially that a socioeconomic status, or particularly a socioeconomic status of a school, is such an impediment to a complex understanding of science that it just can't be overcome. It's just that's just a lost cause. I don't know how many people in here went to school in a inner city public school, but I did for the beginning of my life, and I had brilliant science teachers who inspired me in a lot of ways, who created really fascinating experiments out of like dollar store materials because we didn't have resources and things like that. And I went to school with a lot of peers who also really enjoyed it and became really interested in science. I'm just leery of getting us to a point where this discussion becomes in itself very stratified and in itself symptomatic of the sort of income gap that keeps people from having open discourse.
Yeah. I think I can outpour most people in this room coming up through the Alabama public school system and the country areas. Yeah. I didn't take algebra until I got to college. Yeah. Okay, yes, Eric.
I just want to say, and I agree 100% with what everybody is saying, that and I don't want to go too far into this because it is a touchy subject, but I do believe that family values play a huge role in this. Our parents are working their butts off to make a living for their children, and society is pushing and pushing, and families are doing everything they can to survive. And sometimes I think the pressures of society like that are almost disconnecting families in a lot of ways, the parents to the children. And this is where I think our education systems can somehow find a way to fill in the gaps, also for the parents and for the children, to bring bring the family back together to learn in some really cool environments. And I go back to the environmental education scene where there are so many really great centers all over our states that can provide these opportunities for our families to get out and experience nature together as a family, have fun together as a family, and see the beauty that's out there. And that if there's some way that can happen more than it currently is, that I think that some of those issues could get solved. So I don't know. It's just a thought.
Well, no, I think you have a good point, and it hasn't come up yet. That's something, and I'll be right to you. Just a minute. The study of biodiversity has a unique quality to it. It's one of the few fields of science in which you can immediately perceive the nature of original research, and individuals can contribute almost immediately. You can take a family out, and with technology it's already becoming immediately available, identify almost any kind of creature you find. You can also see if you can develop a little interest in the family, look for rare species or even new species. You know, the kind of programs going on in the Great Smokies Mountain National Park. You really can make science visible and doable to kids at a fairly early age, and to families of various backgrounds, say, as opposed to particle physics. You were about to, yeah.
I just wanted to add quickly, I wasn't trying to say that you can't overcome a difficult socioeconomic background. I just think that it's more of a problem in science learning than having a religious background. But people may disagree with that.
Yeah, okay, well, now we've got something going here. And I think that the lady at the end there, I don't got your name,
I also
raised her
want to say,
hand first.
Going on with that, I also want to say that the people who are being sort of acting as the impediments to conservation right now are the people in government and at the top, of course, corporations and such, and those are not people who came from difficult socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's really not what's holding us back at this stage. And I think one of the most important things we can do, and we've touched on this a little bit, and obviously with your book, The Creation, you touched on this a lot, is try to frame the environment as a, not like necessarily religious issue, but as a Republican issue. And right now it's very much a Democratic issue. And all the solutions that we've proposed have been in terms of expanding the power of the federal government. And obviously that doesn't really work with Republicans because they want smaller government. And so how can we frame the environment in a way that coincides more closely with their core values? Because it does, you know, in essence, we just can't shape it in a way that they agree with.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep that one in mind. We haven't gotten to the humanities at all. There's things like spiritual values and so on. If we can talk that up a bit, let's do it. Okay, I know you were trying to say something here.
So I had something on prior, I think so maybe I'll pick up on this thread, but I did want to say that I think we were having sort of two separate conversations. One is very much about the structural factors that underlie inequality in the educational system and other parts of society, and another which is substantive, pertaining to the content which is being taught within schools. And so I think maybe that's the more productive thread to stick to, given that I think solving income inequality is quite difficult. But pertaining to the substantive question, I would like to suggest that we think back to the history of science, and that's something that's been really lost in terms of transcending this issue of the science, what has become a science versus religion. And going back to your comment about science as truth, I mean, if you look back to, you know, everyone from Newton to Darwin to all of these people who led up to the creation of the scientific method as a method, many of them and most of them were people of good faith and religion who did not see a necessary conflict between trying to understand the universe, whether it's, you know, the universe created by the great watchmaker or or other ideas, and that these things don't necessarily have to be in conflict, especially if the purpose and the goal we're trying to achieve is actually a sort of a pragmatic approach to promoting conservation. I think these discussions, especially these debates, have gone back to the Scopes trial, and I think that's a very hard debate to win if someone has a fundamentally different notion of truth, but I do think that, even just going back and talking more in our curriculum about the history of science, you can find both the origin of ideas, the origin of methodology, without necessarily having to deal with some of what has become, I think, a conflict that doesn't really exist in the history of science.
Well, that's because people didn't know very much. I mean, when Newton was trying to divine from the Bible a secret code that explained the nature of God, at the same time he was creating the first laws of physics, that was not a disturbance to him. He just didn't know very much. I'll just make a statement now that you can dispute. One of the reasons that science has not really confronted religious fundamentalist belief anywhere in settings of the kind we've been bringing up, fundamentalists, creationists, literalists, holding their own even within school systems, is that it's been the wrong kind of science and scientific information that's been brought to bear on the issues. The meaning of life, if I can say that, use that expression, has been claimed, or our meaning of existence and meaning of life has been claimed as their domain by people ranging all the way from astrophysicists and through now neurobiologists and so on. But in fact, the meaning of life is going to be solved only within one particular discipline, and that is evolutionary biology. That's the claim. So I would let you leave that for you to consider. The neurobiologists today are going to be sending billions of dollars working out the wiring and the transmission molecular mechanisms of the whole brain. It's called BAM, the brain mapping activity or action or whatever. The brain activity program, BAP. Let me get you this right. Yeah, brain activity program. This is the consortium of massively supported neurobiologists now mapping the human brain. But as they map it, they're not going to come any closer to, they may come closer to the nature of consciousness, but they're not going to come any closer to the meaning of life. Astrophysicists are trying to figure out what happened in the first 3 minutes of following the Big Bang haven't got a clue. The only people who are going to explain the meaning of life are evolutionary biologists, to explain why, how it happened, and just what went on to create the human brain, and why we are the way we are today. I realize that may sound like a bit of territorial claiming on my part, but I do believe that's the case. Anyway, let's run on for one more, and then I'm going to come back to our critic-in-chief sitting next to me. No, someone else was raised their hand. Okay, you, sir.
So I think I think that is a little biased, but if you say that the only way to explain the meaning of life is through evolutionary biology, then there is no meaning of life, then it's all just evolution. And if you take out any kind of religious or philosophical, I think the meaning of life as a phrase is inherently philosophical. And if you take it out and say it's just scientific, then there's no need for the phrase then. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. And I've addressed all these issues in the book forthcoming. So I lay before you the prospect of taking a look at my book, The Meaning of Human Existence.
You could send me
due out in October. Okay. Because that, and to some extent in the book, The Social Conquest of Earth, I've addressed the issues of the origin of religion at some length. The biological origins, just why it was, how it could evolve, and as a form of tribalism and so on and It's a set of ideas worth considering. But I was just making the point that proved or left unproved, that's the only way we can actually get an explanation. It will never be obtained through other scientific disciplines. That's the argument. Okay. Right or wrong? Okay. Throw the spanner into the
So to
engine.
take a spin on that,
Okay.
if you have a room of average Americans and you are discussing the meaning of life, and the first words out of your mouth are evolutionary biology, 40% of the religious fundamentalists and more are either going to leave the room or they've blocked you off instantly. So it's I think that maybe is a matter of branding a little bit. It might be that evolutionary biology is the explanation for this, but if you leave out a few keywords like evolution and Darwin, you might be able to keep their attention. And coming back to Shayna's comment about history of science and how do we teach science better, it might come down to, if you boil science all the way down, I think it's really just curiosity and the natural world. And those are the two elements. And science came about through those two.
That's right.
And what we need to encourage in science education is those two things. Maybe not so much specifically learning evolution or creation, but if you can encourage people to appreciate the natural environment and be passionate about it, and at the same time encourage curiosity, those two will come together and we'll have religious, fundamentalists who are approaching these from a different perspective, but maybe come to the same conclusions.
Okay, fair enough. Although you just went sailing in a high altitude surveillance flight over a wide degree of area, starting with what you just said, if I might dispute some of it, that the dispensationalists or the fundamentalists would not walk out the room if I decided not to mention evolution, right? This would be like discussing and teaching chemistry, providing we don't mention atoms, all right? In other words, it becomes meaningless, all right? And as far as natural history, biodiversity as a subject, as a wonderful portal and entree into the understanding of what science is and how it's done, then I agree with you totally. But I think that it would be a valuable exercise for everyone in this room to be able to write out a definition of science. Science is, and then do it. Scientific knowledge is, and then write it out, because there is a definition. And I think you should also be, in the second paragraph, after you've defined it, not just as a way of thinking, but as a way of investigation and framing of questions and the proving of questions. You'll follow a paragraph on the method of competing hypotheses and the testing of hypotheses. And then the third paragraph you should go to is the necessity of achieving eventually consilience, interoperability of scientific principles and what appears to be substantial scientific knowledge. Okay, ma'am.
So I actually am giving a throwback response to Vivian's comment. All right.
Okay.
Because I was really excited by your comment, and I thought it was really, really clever and brilliant insight into one of the failures of conservationism as a whole. And I think that in some ways it kind of links to a little bit what Cooper was saying about curiosity about the natural world. is that there are these places where everyone kind of develops their understanding of the natural environment and develops these carings about it. And so one of those, I think, particularly from a Republican perspective, is a sense of place and a sense of proprietary ownership over an area that is of significance to you as an individual or you as a collective, as a town, as a community, as an identity, and that we don't focus enough on that, or we don't sort of foster that in conservationism. And I think that then that links into the way that we teach science and the way that we educate about it. If you have kids from a young age, like Dr. Wilson was lucky to do, getting out into an environment that they believe to be their sort of home and their realm, and a place that not only that belongs to them in sort of not a legal proprietary sense, but in the sense of this is a place where I belong, and this is a place for which I'm responsible, that I think that speaks to a lot of core values that a lot of people have in communities that are not traditionally like liberal, urban, democratic communities. And so I think that there's an opportunity to kind of shift the way that we sort of breaking it down to the fundamentals the way Cooper has, shift the way that we are sort of introducing people to these ideas and appealing to a larger base by appealing to these kinds of things.
Okay.
I agree. And it's hard because like a lot of the charismatic megafauna that we put as the poster child for like all these causes are like things like polar bears and pandas that don't live in people's habitats because we already killed off all the megafauna like 10,000 years ago. But we do have to find other ways for people to relate to their immediate surroundings. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I have like two different comments, but one of the things that you have mentioned in your books a lot is how the moral values have changed. And I think from our Paleolithic lives, we had some moral values that were very direct to how we lived, like as a group, like what you do to someone else affects you, and how you hunt affects the group. And I think, I'm going to say something really bad, but I think religion has probably contaminated those values a lot in giving you this sense of this exterior thing that you can go to heaven if you do good, instead of doing good for the sake of your group or for your own sake. And I think that's one of the fundamental problems of conservation, or just getting along with people on the bus or anywhere. It's just the moral values. You get this kind of this break of saying, oh, I just go to church and then I go to heaven, and it's very easy. Before you had to work for what was your subsistence and how you were going to live. And I see it as a very it's not just religion teaching creationism or not. It's religion and how we do things and why we do them, why we help others or not, why we preserve the world or not. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say is I feel like maybe my role is to zoom out of this room a little bit and just say that I wish a lot of the countries in the world were having the same discussion about what we teach. Most of the people in the world just don't have the chance to go to school. So I worry because this is a country where most people have the chance to go to school, but then again, they go and do things that are not good to the environment. So I am convinced that education is the way to do this, but I think we should combine it a little bit with moral education and ethics. And just ethics for the sake of it, not ethics for religion or for God or for for punishment. Just I don't know. This is some very complicated issues.
You made a mistake. You said, I don't know. I think you do know. And you said it very well. You were going to add something. Oh, I thought you were about to. Okay, let's continue the discussion if you wish. Yes, sir.
I don't think that, I agree with what you're saying, but I don't think it's you have to make a distinction. I don't know. I think if you have you're good because you think that that's what God wants, or you're good because you're altruistic for your group because of your genes, I think why does that have to be different?
Well, because the problem with being good just because of God is that there are certain things you can do to get forgiveness, like pray, that don't have any effect on the things. So people think that they go to church and that absolves all their climate change. They look at their gas emissions. It doesn't. In reality, it absolves them for themselves, but not for the world. So how you do your ethics and how those ethics have an effect on the world is different. What way you do them. It's how you get punished is you go to hell, but that's when I die. So I can do whatever I want now, and then I'll go to hell. But if you understand that what you do now has an impact on like
But
6 billion people, then it changes a little bit, I think.
but what if your ethics are totally Randian or something?
Randy,
And-
I don't know what Randy means.
Sorry, like if you hold the ethic that the most ethical thing you can do is always be self-interested. Like,
Well,
I mean,
the ethics says like,
well, but that's a legitimate ethic that not a lot, but some people do hold. I mean, I think I see what you're saying. I don't know
Doesn't mean
that.
it's right because they, like, some people hold it.
Right, yeah, but the idea is that you can have good religious ethics and bad religious ethics in the same way that you can have good secular ethics, bad secular ethics. It's, it just seems like, I agree with you that I think ethics needs to be a part of the discussion. It's blurry.
Well, the punishment you get from bad religion is like you pray like 2 days.
Okay.
The punishment you get for bad ethics in the real world should be
Let's go to you again.
So, I guess I have one comment just really quickly on what was just said, and then one question for you. So, first, the comment on what was just said is I don't believe that, or I do believe that you can teach a genuinely self-interested person that conservation is still important, because you can say, I mean, maybe not if you don't care about your children, but if you just care about yourself, I think there's still some sort of argument that can be made that you need all of these systems to have the earth in which you live. Like, you can't breathe if we hadn't have maintained plants, or like you couldn't have any food if we didn't have good soil. So even, maybe not if you're self-interested in only yourself and not future generations, but I think that there's at least some argument that can at least start getting to even some version of bad secular ethics. So I don't know where that's going.
Randian perspective.
Yeah, no, exactly.
No,
Exactly.
That's not my dream, but
that's why I only wanted to say it for like 2 seconds and then move on. But one thing that I do have a question, and this was a while ago now, but when you were talking about the meaning of life, and this is a hard question to even ask, but so frequently when I hear the meaning of life, I don't even know like what that phrase means. So in my own mind, I've broken it down to like, why are we even asking what's the meaning of life? And the questions that I most hear are the versions of where did we come from and how should we live? So on the one hand, I see how if you say evolutionary biology is the way in which we're going to understand the meaning of life, I can understand how that can answer the where did we come from, and then that can shape how we live if that's the version of that you believe in. But then in the creation, you said yourself that we can have two different beliefs of where we came from, but still come to a similar understanding of how we should live. So I'm wondering how, like, just to expand on your statement of how that is the only way in which you can answer the meaning of life.
Well, remember there's 3 questions I opened the book with. Which are, you get off the canvas of Gauguin. I just did that in order to bring humanists into the readership. But they are, where do we come from, what are we, where are we going? And then I threw in a quote from a French writer named Vercors that I liked a lot. It was that all of man, all of humankind, troubles come from the fact that we do not know what we are and cannot agree on what to become. So the meaning of ourselves, the meaning of our species is crucial. And it is soluble. And we are beginning to solve it. We are beginning to understand where we came from. And that's a big part of the meaning. Because meaning, I think, can be interpreted as the history of a person, of a country, of humanity itself. And at the level of humanity itself, then it becomes this very central philosophical question. The meaning of our species is our history. And in history, as I like to say, history without prehistory is meaningless. Prehistory without biology is meaningless. We have to know, in tracking the history of our species, the biological history of it, the causes of them, the origin of our idiosyncrasies and peculiarities. In other words, human nature, just what is it and why is it a certain form and not another. And that's within our grasp, not just how the brain works, but why the brain works a certain way. And we need to know the meaning in order to agree upon our goals. When it came to religion, and the statement is always made in defense of religion, that, well, religion is one way of understanding meaning or one way of thinking, and science is another way of understanding and thinking about what we all mean and so on. I think it's important to consider the question, or this proposition, of the difference between spirituality or religion in the higher theological sense of pondering whether we have any kind of afterlife, whether there is a deity, this sort of thing. And that can be argued among people in complete amity. You can go up to a person in America, even a bunch of fundamentalists, and say, well, I'm not sure about I don't really believe in the afterlife, and they're going to be angry. But if you come up to a bunch and you say, I don't believe that Jesus was born a virgin birth, or anything like that, you might get into a fight. Why? Because there is a distinction between religion and faith. And the problem is faith. Faith consists of the creation story of a tribe. And humanity is, above all things, tribal. We form groups and we make powerful connections to our tribes. We must have a tribe, we must have a group to feel secure, to feel we belong, that we in fact, there's meaning to our lives to be a member of a tribe. And the strongest form of tribal cohesion, creation and cohesion, has always been through the creation story. And the purpose of the creation story is in part to connect with a powerful entity that favors your tribe and gives your tribe, the beliefs of your tribe, its superiority over other tribes. And do not deny that even, maybe the Quakers have escaped it, but it's hard to imagine any denomination or faith that does not have as its core the belief in the superiority of its creation story and its own centrality in it, and the belief of that creation story as the source of the strength of the tribe. And if we look at it that way, we come a little closer to the meaning of humanity in terms of the power of religion on the way we deal with our problems. Some of you have said here quite clearly that you think that the issue of solving the major problems of environment can be handled independently of religion, that is at least separated from it. And you're quite right if that's the way you see it, because in reality, if religion is indeed the inevitable, very biological product of tribalism, then we can get, or then tribalism, that is faith, religious faith, has hijacked spirituality. Faith has hijacked religion in the higher theological sense. If we can get around that, then we can come to a much closer agreement to have a program of environmental investigation and action that is based upon reality of the way the world really works and the best way to save it. So that's my argument. You can disagree with you if you wish. Okay, right. But if you'd like to read more about it, you can see this reading list, including especially the Social Conquest of Earth, and also the one coming out, for which I expect very bad reviews to appear in the New York Review of Books, entitled The Meaning of Human Existence. I think that we should return these fundamental questions to our discourse. If you think about it for a moment, it's been abandoned. Philosophers have abandoned the questions of what are we, who are we, and with good reason, because they haven't got any way to think about it without thinking about the origins, the biological origins of the species, the origin of culture, how that evolved, and why, and under what circumstances, and so on. That's beyond their realm of discourse. So philosophers, for the most part, have abandoned the whole program on which they're supposed to be the leaders of thought. And religions will never, at least religious faith, will never answer it, because they are bound to doctrines and creation stories cast in stone at the very beginning when the tribe was formed and grew and obtained its power. And introspection is never going to do it, because you cannot, a brain cannot really understand itself. We're so completely controlled by emotional responses and severe limitations, sensory limitations anyway, on what's happening in the world around us. So I come back to the argument, without trying to, shall we say, tribalize evolutionary biology. I don't want to do that. That it is this approach, that part of biology, that is important in resuming these fundamental philosophical questions, because we now might be able to answer them. I would remind you that biology is divided into two modes of explanation, all of biology, to the structural, that is, how things work. What are the elements, what are the processes, what are the entities? And then, if I use a broad term, evolutionary biology is why we have those processes and entities and why they work in such a way and not another. At any rate, that's the way I've been thinking about the issue, and maybe I'm wrong, but I hope I'm not wrong. Go on.
This is kind of science fiction-y, maybe?
What?
This question that I've got is maybe kind of science fiction-y in some ways, but I'm just curious. When you were talking in your book about group selection and individual selection and how it applies to multi-level selection of species.
Sure.
And then the recoding of genes. You know, if somewhere in the future we're going to be able to manipulate our genes, where we take our our altruistic side of group selection, which is our good side, I guess, versus our evil, selfish side of individual selection, where we could somehow recode the human in some way, where the altruistic group selection, that side would somehow get coded onto the individual selfish side. I don't know. It's kind of very science fiction-y, but is it possible?
No, it's not science fiction.
Do you see it in
because
the room?
if the multi-level selection theory, that is just straightforward population genetics, incidentally, and I and a group of mathematicians had to overthrow kin selection or inclusive fitness theory, as it's been a paradigm shift that is happening. And those of you who are interested in pursuing this as why we are returning to population genetics with the gene as the fundamental unit of selection, then you can consult a very recent issue of the Proceedings of the National Academy. I think that's in volume 50, just out the last few months. The latest new way of describing the multi-level selection, group selection versus individual level selection. And there are a series of other papers, mostly by mathematicians interested in biology, but more and more biologists beginning to enter to this dispute. I think we're going to win it. If human and social evolution generally has originated by multi-level selection, then group selection competes with individual level selection. In all evolutionary processes involving cooperation and other social phenomena. And the way to put it, just to make it as sort of like a formula that makes it easy to remember, the theory of multi-level selection, which is the following, that within groups, selfish individuals always win. In competition between groups, that is, that form of natural selection with the groups as the units competing, then groups composed of altruists defeat groups composed of selfish individuals. So there has to be a kind of a tension.
Right.
And this makes sense because it helps to explain why our inner feelings are always in conflict.
Right.
Why we're always engaged in a conflict based upon conscience. You know, what is good for me and my immediate family, I see what's good. It's, you know, like robbing a bank if I knew I could get away with it. Well, at any rate, versus what is good for the society, we need to have an evolutionary explanation of why there is a Congressional Medal of Honor and why people have noble impulses, which we do, all of us do, and how we can see pure altruism operating and being fundamental to the cohesion of a society, while at the same time we all have these selfish thoughts and impulses. It's in constant conflict. But if that's the way humanity was created, if you will, if I may say, if that's the meaning, one of the important elements of the meaning of humanity, I don't think we would ever want to go to one extreme or other, even if we could fix the genes. If you had a completely altruistic society, we would be a bunch of super intelligent ants. If you had a completely selfish society and move too far that way, the society will dissolve.
But wouldn't it bring more cooperation into our groups if we were more, you know, I don't want to be completely altruistic, you know, I want to have individual thoughts, but it would bring more cooperation into the mix, which would solve the great problems.
We don't understand enough about the biology of the brain, much less the genetic code, the genome affecting the brain, to even talk sensibly about that subject.
Makes sense.
Besides,
That's where the science
the conflict, the internal conflict I just described, I believe is the product of the way any highly social species is created, is the source of our creativity. If you think about it, a great deal of the creative arts are based upon depiction of that conflict. Why do we just love the same old stories over and over again of love, of conflict, of trust, of betrayal, told in different contexts and so on, celebrating authentic heroism, punishing extreme selfishness and so on. Most of the creative arts are based upon depictions of the simulation of feelings that have emotional feelings that have to do with those conflicts and their resolution. The humanities, and particularly the creative arts, are an extremely limited creative process. And while I'm nattering on about these subjects, the time has come to bring the humanities closer into science, or rather science closer into humanities. In my new book, incidentally, I've addressed this issue of the return of the Enlightenment, the attempt to bring humanity and the sciences together. And I've addressed the humanities. I have a chapter called The All-Importance of the Humanities, and I've spoken to the humanities, particularly people in the creative arts, by saying, would you like to join us? Or rather, would you like to colonize science? So I'll just leave it at that and invite you to have a look at this book when it comes out in October. Yeah.
So I have another question, maybe from playing devil's advocate, or as maybe a book reviewer might ask this question. Because I don't have your new book in front of me, I can't really
Well,
say whether or not you've addressed this,
Well, I'm
but I would be
hoping-
curious to hear what you
I'm
say.
hoping that some of you will become book reviewers. I'm trying to influence you. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
So, given that you might have perfectly addressed this in your book, and I just don't know because I haven't read it.
No, of course not.
So, if your book, The Creation, the way I understood it was trying to get people to talk about the future of humanity and how we should act morally without agreeing on where we came from. Sort
Yes,
of just
on the
saying,
special-
given that we
on-
believe different
Right,
things,
on the special
we
issue
can...
of biodiversity.
Yes.
I wasn't trying to address a broader issues than that. I was
Yeah,
just-
so if you're
Yeah.
so if a book reviewer might say that this book was intended to maybe put aside the question of whether or not we can agree on our creation story, whether it's evolutionary biology or religion, but we want to come together on a mission of how we should live, then would this book reviewer, having read this book, in your new book, think that maybe you're going back on the spirit of that argument by claiming a creation story, or by claiming that evolutionary biologists have the unique view on the meaning of life? Would that be contradicting the spirit of the argument in your previous book?
No, because the creation story that emerges gradually from evolutionary biology, evolutionary science perhaps, is based upon the method of competing hypotheses, and is subject always even to changes as new knowledge and new ways of reasoning about that knowledge emerge in a testable manner. So that, and that would include even paradigm shifts, such as the one we're trying to pull off or create in the basic genetics, population genetics of the origin of eusociality. You see, we do have also, in that particular argument, I've got this part in the social conquest book, that we have found by looking through phylogenies, trees of evolution to show trends in different groups, and also even in fossil record of the origin of the most advanced social organisms on Earth. There have been, in fact, 20 times in the history of life we know of, 20 times. In the last, 450 million years of occupancy, mainly on the land and shallow water, that an advanced social form of life has come into existence. Now that gives us like the origin of flight, an examination of how flight is achieved biologically. It gives us a chance to shed light on exactly what did happen in creating advanced societies like the social insects and humans and a very small number of other species. And this, as I've recommended, and I have an article about to submit to the proceedings of the National Academy, but it's been made in some ways in the past. This is due to it always follows what's called a pre-adaptation. And that pre-adaptation is a form of maternal care. And an organization prior to advanced social behavior based upon a particular way of life, adaptation to the environment. I won't go into further detail. But we can approach this, and this is one of the advantages of science, is not just its accessibility to test, but also that it can be approached from different directions with new bodies of information, and they can be tested to see if they are interoperable. In other words, if one thing doesn't comport with another at all, you can see you haven't done the job, or it still links to be built, or you've made the wrong conclusion. So that's the sort of thing we're up to at the growing edge of evolutionary biology. And this does have relevance to what you're thinking about, which is the environment, because as you've been saying yourself repeatedly, and effectively, eventually we're coming down to a moral issue, an issue of what's right for the human species, what's right for the human species somehow, not somehow, obviously, has to be what's right for the rest of life, because if you start destroying the rest of life, you're changing the environment in enormous ways that are going to kick back at human security and so on. I've just about run out of time. I wonder, so that I can escape without being rebutted, after all what I've just said, if I might close this now, and for our last meeting, throw it open again, and I'd appreciate any reasoning that we have then on the Friday meeting, picking up from this point, because although some of you might be annoyed that we're getting away from, I don't know, the issue of whether we should be removing all the dams or whether or not the national park system should be expanded. I know these are all important issues that could consume us for the entire term, but I'd like to get back to this one at least for a little while, since it has a lot to do with how you are our future leaders are going to take the rest of things to the 22nd century. So it's important for you to be thinking about these issues, and you won't find these issues addressed very many places. That's a problem. Incidentally, will you reach 100? You probably will. Think about this. There are about 2,000 single mutant gene caused diseases, hereditary diseases we know about. We're going to be able to fix those. That's right on the horizon in terms of gene substitution technology, of fixing or skipping over it's called the missing molecular steps caused by the single mutant diseases. There are approximately 1,400 known species of parasites that afflict the human body. You know, from viruses all the way to these disgusting guinea worms that burrow under the skin in parts of Africa. We can eliminate all of them, including malaria. That's certainly going to be done. We are going to discover more and more about health into so-called old age and about expanding longevity. At the present time, if you reach the age of 100, then you have a 50% chance of reaching a 101, a 50% of chance of 101s reaching 102, until finally you only have one chance in about 1,000 of reaching what's called a super centenarian, 110. We're going to change that. I mean, you're going to change that. You're going to do it through medical science and genetics and ways of life. And so a lot of people are going to be living to be 110, maybe beyond. Do you know the oldest woman, the age of the oldest person, rather, who ever lived? Does anybody know? Oh, you ought to know this because you should have a goal in life.
123.
It's Marie Claire Clément, a French woman who had the documented evidence of her birth and year by year her life. She finally died at 123. Okay.